Amazing. Well, my mom always said don't be between people and their lunch, so I think we're in the perfect position that you're with your lunches. Thank you so much to everyone at GCP for giving us a seat at the table and allowing us to share our experiences. We are incredibly excited to be with you today. I think that one of the biggest ways we're going to solve these huge challenges in our workforce and in our world is multi-generational conversations. So the way that it's going to work is we're going to engage in a bit of a conversation ourselves about what we've experienced. I'll share some information of what's happening across the country, and then we're going to turn to you all because we want this to be a conversation. And interestingly enough, Deloitte recently published a study that said 70% of companies recognize creating a workforce that's multi-generational is our key to winning. Also, interestingly enough, only 10% of them said they are ready to do so. So we hope that we will be able to give you some tips and tools or just new ideas to help you be more ready to be welcoming a multi-generational workforce. And I'm going to stop speaking and hand it over to my lovely new friends here and peers and colleagues. We represent Gen Z and Millennial and are going to have some really interesting conversations. So we'll start with you, quick introduction, Julie.
Hi everyone, my name is Julia Matter. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, and I'm Generation Z.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to see all of you. My name is Kwame Butchway. I'm with Village Capital Corporation, and I am a millennial, proudly.
Hi, my name is Juan Peña. Not as cool as these guys, but I'm the Investor Relations Coordinator at Team Neo. Proud Gen Z and musician.
Amazing. I just want to take a quick moment to differentiate between our generations because I think often people look at us and think those are the young folks in the workforce, but more often than not I'm reminded just how different Gen Z is from millennials. I want to share a quick anecdote that happened a few months ago. I was speaking to my mentee who is really excited to get a permanent role in the job and asked me, how can I make sure that I'm advocating and getting the role that I want? So I shared what I had been given, sort of the tips and advice. And when she responded, I'm not kidding, my jaw dropped because she said to me, I want to be a part of change, I want to drive impact, but I also want to respect my boundaries and not work beyond 9 to 5. But my jaw dropped not out of judgment, but out of shock of what different experiences millennials had entering the workforce than Gen Z. On my first day on the job at 22 years old, I was told, be the first in your seat, the last to leave, show them that you're willing to put in the extra hours, and that's how you can drive impact. It's a very big difference between the Gen Z who's coming in and saying, hey, we want boundaries, we want some help. And I think there's something really powerful to that. I have a little bit of cringiness because in 2015 there was a New York Times article that said work-life blend, because if you're passionate about your job, there shouldn't be a line. I think we've all seen through burnout rates that there should be a line. And so just want to make a note that we're going to have quite different experiences between millennials and Gen Z, and also to give a nod of respect to you all that this is not an easy task to create a workforce that serves both of us. But turning back to you guys, you have many different options. We all know the workforce is incredibly tight right now. You could have worked anywhere. You're probably getting searched and hunted on LinkedIn to move to different companies. So why is it that you picked to be with your employer and to do the work that you're doing? Juan, we'll start with you.
I remember when I first started the application process, the 100+ applications that I sent during my senior year of college, which was this year. I just graduated in May. There were a lot of difficult application processes. A lot of people were asking for cover letters. A lot of people were asking for all this information, name, address, etc. And then there were other companies, and Tino was one of them, that all they wanted was a resume. I was like, okay, I'll gladly provide my resume. And so I did, and I think about a week or two later, I forgot that I applied for the job, and I get a call from the CFO of the company, Laura Budak, and she tells me, we love your resume. We'd like for you to come in for an interview. Mind you, at this point, I had never heard of Team Neo. I didn't know what Team Neo was. I didn't know what economic development was, so I had to brush up as soon as I could. And even looking on the website, I still couldn't figure out what Team Neo did. It wasn't until that I got in front of Laura and my now boss, Dawn, that I was able to understand the work that we do, that I was able to understand that it's meaningful, that it's impactful, and just from the conversation and from everyone being themselves, I was sold on the company. It ultimately came down to those two things, the culture and the values of the company, which were very much aligned with me.
think it's such an interesting point too that we need to know what companies do. So kind of a flag to you all is your websites matter. We are looking at websites. In fact, a recent study said that 80% of job seekers look at the website first. So if people can't figure out what you're doing from your website, that might be a first place to start. Julia, also as someone who's recently entered the workforce, why did you pick to be at Downtown Cleveland?
So at Downtown Cleveland Alliance, they originally offered me an internship, and it was given the internship with the possibility that it could turn into a job. So I had, like you want, a lot of difficulties applying for different jobs. The application process was not easy. Some websites make it a little bit easier where, the quick apply, and that's great. But I found I would spend hours and hours filling out different cover letters, filling out my resume, and then having to enter that same data into a website that asked those same questions. So that was very frustrating because I felt like my resources were my time wasn't being well spent. So I went to this internship with the possibility of it turning into a job, and it did. And I was very excited to take that. Again, with the application process, a lot of companies were asking for 3 to 5 years of experience, and I had just recently graduated college. So although I did those internships, multiple internships in college, they were saying that wasn't enough. And that was frustrating because I knew how much I had to give, and I felt like I wasn't even given the opportunity to do that. So a little bit about that is internships can be very, very powerful. So definitely offer those because you can take in that talent, see how much maybe those people have to offer without having those years and years of experience. We're ready to be molded into great people in your field. We just need that time. And I think really important is that multi-generational companies and employers. So we have people who are really eager to learn, and then we have those experienced employees who are willing to teach.
That's great. And Kwame, I know you also had an internship that led to
I was just going to say that I appreciate what you just said, Julia. I think internships are an important opportunity for a lot of young people that are entering into the workforce to get their foot through the door. So I moved here from Ghana to go to Case Western, so I was getting my master's there. Prior to coming to the United States, I was already working, had experiences in journalism and corporate affairs and academia. So when I came here, it almost felt like I was starting all over again. And as part of my coursework, we're all required to do internships. So for my second year internship, I wanted something that was non-traditional to what I was studying. So I went to school for social policy. I focused on housing policy. Everybody else was going to other non-profits and doing the traditional community development, economic development work. I wanted a bit more of the finance, lens to whatever theory I was learning in school. So I reached out to Village Capital Corporation at the time, and gracefully, the president of the organization at the time, I worked on a task force with her. When they were doing the whole Wood Hill Homes transportation process, I worked on a task force with her. So she was like, I think, you look like a smart enough guy, so I'll give you a shot. So she invited me in, I submitted the application, she took me in and moved on from there, from an intern to a manager to a director, and I've stayed with the organization since I joined as an intern. And so I never really thought I would be playing at the intersection of economic development, real estate, community development. But that internship gave me the opportunity to really clarify for myself what my angling would be coming out of school and what I wanted to do. And I think the culture of the organization, some of the things that were in there that I came to encounter is part of the reason that I decided to stay on. So yeah, I agree. I think internships are an incredible opportunity to do that. And also it was a paid internship, so that made it even sweeter.
That's important because sometimes we're in the position when we graduate, we can't take an unpaid internship. We are not in that position. We have student loans and we have bills to pay. So I think a paid internship is a really great way to not have to commit to that person yet while getting to feel for the talent.
That actually fits very well with what we were discussing over lunch, is that, at least from the millennial perspective, when we joined the workforce, it was all about passion and purpose. And that was also during the Silicon Valley sort of like sexy workforce of ping pong tables and open floor plans. So they underpaid us, but they fed into our passion. And I think what you're seeing right now is the direct result of making people basically be burnt out. Millennials are not buying homes. We're not having families at the same rate as previous generations. It's because we had unpaid internship student debt and honestly, in many ways, being underpaid. And so I think there are many things that have led to this moment in time. So please pay people, and it doesn't mean that you have to pay them what a big company can, but pay your interns and they'll turn into amazing full-time workers like you see here. One big thing that I just wanted to note is a difference here between folks who've been in the workforce for a while and why they choose to stay, and folks who are trying to get into the workforce. Kwame, do you mind touching a bit on why you decided to stay, even though you've gotten other offers?
Yeah, so I think, again, you mentioned that for a lot of us young people, we are value-driven. And so when we are looking at different organizations, we are looking at what their alignment is between our personal values and what the values of the organization is. And so for me, coming from Ghana, coming here, doing the work that I do, being in the community, seeing some of the challenges in the community, reading about it made me realize that, well, I value equity a lot. And so equitable development was something that I was very interested in. Coming to the organization, I realized that was something that we're also very passionate about. And so there was already that alignment there. And so that gave me the opportunity to want to do the work that I was doing, and I enjoyed doing it. But in addition to that, the organization has been flexible enough with me and have given me enough leeway and trust to be able to lead new initiatives and bringing new ideas and be innovative in the work that we are doing. So it's not always been I've come in and then they have this set of work or scope of work that I needed to do. From my internship before I accepted my next role, we sat down and wrote the job description and the scope of work together. And so I had a voice in what I was going to be doing. And even beyond that, I had a voice in the direction that it was going to take. So there was that flexibility there. It was there was that value alignment. They paid me fairly decent, more than I think a lot of the people that I was graduating with were getting paid. So that was also extra incentive. So I felt like I found little bits and pieces of all the things that I needed at one place. And so even when people have thrown, bigger amounts of money, I'm like, well, I have these other things that create a balance for me that I probably would not get for maybe 20K, 30K extra. And so it made me want to stay where I was. And it's not about even getting comfortable in your own space, because like the job itself is challenging, things are evolving. And my title is literally innovation, so we are literally designing and leading new initiatives all the time, so it keeps me engaged and intellectually stimulated, which is another thing that I feel a lot of young people are looking for, is that within the job that they are doing, there's the opportunity for career advancement, right? So I started as an intern and worked, to direct, and now I don't know where this is going to take me, but I feel like there's a pathway for me to grow in this job, and I do not necessarily need to leave this company in order to see the growth that I needed. So I think those are some of the things that have kept me here at Village Capital for the time that it has.
There's one point I just want to highlight to what you just mentioned. How many of you have heard about silent quitting or the silent resignation? It's a very big buzzy thing right now, and I've seen people call us the quitting generation. I think it's also really important to note that Deloitte found that millennials are the most collaborative-driven generation in the workforce. And so we're quitting because we don't feel like we have a collaborative role in our jobs. So I think that's something to think about as well, is if people are quiet quitting, maybe look in to see why are they doing that. If they want to have a collaborative nature of creating their job description or creating the career path forward. So it's always interesting to see both sides of the coin. What is the headline and then what is the lived experience? But we want to sort of transition now to talk about tips and things that we've personally experienced or that we've seen with our peers that are working. We also want to recognize we know almost all of you are already doing things to be helping next-gen talent and to attract them and to retain them. Not to belabor these points, but there's a recent study that said 80.1 million jobs will be unfilled by 2030. 80 million jobs in the United States we do not have workers for. That's from the retirement rate, that is from the fact we're not having kids at the same pace, what happened after the recession in '08. So what are we going to do? We have to keep people, and it's a very competitive market. As of August, I believe, for every one person looking for a job, there were 2 open jobs. So we know that this is important, and we know you're already doing it. So hopefully you'll see that this is us joining you at the table and sharing some of the things that we think might be really important and helpful. Well, let's just start with our Gen Z colleagues here. As you guys are coming into the workforce, you're about 23% of the workforce in the next few years, which is pretty shocking considering you're just out of college. But maybe we'll start with you. What are some tips or tricks for keeping folks?
So in the past, I worked for a company, and a couple of things that they did that really stood out to me was they had a health wellness little stipend that they gave their employees every year. So this was $200 as an individual, or if you had a family, it was $400, and this was like a middle-sized company. I think that goes a long way to looking at the individual, saying we care about you, and this could go towards a wide range of something. So it was a reimbursement, so you could put it towards a gym membership, or maybe if you wanted to take up skiing lessons, or maybe something more along the wellness, like yoga or something like that. Now, there's a lot of ways you could use these funds, but I think it's a doable amount of money for a smaller, middle-sized company, and really shows like you care about your individual employees. Another small thing that I think you could do is a student loan reimbursement. So you could do the way I've seen programs set up in the past is if you have student loans, they give you $100 a month. And this might not be a ton of money, it's not going to pay off your student loans for you, but again, I think it goes a long way to show like we see that you're in this situation and we want to help you out. And they've even done things like if you're there for 2 years, we do $200 a month. So it encourages people to stay longer, and then at the same time they're getting help. So I think that's just a really important small thing you can do to attract and keep employers.
And I think just to show that this point is not just her situation or even her friends, Forrester had a survey that found 86% of individuals working between 19 and 29 said that they're more likely to stay at a company if they invest in mental health supports. 86 is a substantial number, so I think that it really does challenge us to think creatively of how we're serving them, whether it be just a sort of a slush fund, if you will, of ways to help them feel fulfilled and balanced, but 86, I think, kind of begins us to look at it.
And going off of that, I feel like this might be kind of like the beer carts of our generation. So it's something where if someone says like, how do you like your new job? It's like, they're really great and they reimburse my gym membership. And like, that's like a talking point. Or, you know, they're starting to pay down my student loans. So it might not be the most significant part of their role or something, but, or like the most significant part of your company, but that's something that is like, I'm really excited about this. So it's a talking point, it looks good for your company. And I think that's something small that you can do that really will have a big splash.
That's a great point. I don't know how it makes me feel that that's the beer carts of, we're growing, millennials are growing, we're evolving. Juan, what are some of the things that you've seen that are really helpful or that you would recommend?
Sure. I think I can summarize it down to 2 things. It would be investing in the employee. To Julie's point, when a company is not interested, is not simply interested in just throwing money in the employee and just telling them to go to work. When the company goes beyond that and they're like, hey, there's professional development resources that you're interested in, go ahead and do it, we'll reimburse it for you. If there is an event or forum that you're interested in attending, go ahead and go, we'll take care of it, because we know that you're going to be better because of it. Investing in the employee is such an important thing, and it goes beyond just like professional development, it also goes into mental health, physical health, etc. I think one thing that really separates our generation is we're not interested in money as much these days, because we value our health, we value our well-being over money. I think that's what my generation is starting to realize. I mean, don't get me wrong, pay us, please pay us. Money is important. Just understand that also as a part of that, we also value our health and health as well. That's how we view it. The other thing is, again, culture. I think I read a statistic somewhere that employers that engage with their employees at least once a week or a couple times a month, that increases their retention rate exponentially. Because it makes the employee feel valued, and I can tell you that my boss, Consuela, she does a great job with that. She's always making sure that I have everything I need. She's always accessible, doors always open. And even beyond that, like all my coworkers are the same exact way. I can walk into any one of their offices, ask a question, or just chat. And I can do that with them. And I feel so great coming into work. It's not something that I dread. It's not something that I feel a weird way about it, because I can come in, say hi to everybody, chat, and everybody feels the same way. So culture and investments into the employee are going to be really key to this generation, and most likely the next one as well.
an example of something that's quick, right? Investment in benefits, and then culture takes a while. So I think really investing in that work now is going to pay off when we are in probably a worse situation for the workforce, let's be honest, in a few years down the road. A little bit different for us as millennials, but Kwame, what tips do you have?
No, I was just going to say, I got worried when you said that we don't value money. We love the money. That's the whole point of working. We want the money, but what I would say is that, as I mentioned, and I think you touched on this, we are a value-driven generation. And so one of the big things that we want to see in companies is that I want to see you walk the talk. And so, for instance, 2020, summer 2020, following George Floyd, we saw a lot of organizations make commitments to equity, and there was big talk. But you go back today, 2 years on, and check the commitments and what they have been able to deliver on some of the promises that they made, and you realize that a lot of companies have, backslidden in what they had committed themselves to. What a lot of young people within companies are looking at is, how are you impacting your community? So you could be doing a great job, there could be great ROIs for the organization, you could be paying them competitive salaries and all of that, but we care about the environment, we care about the communities, we care about the people. So we are looking at how is the company showing up in the community and how is it impacting it. And that also becomes a pride point for a lot of fast organizations that we work with when we know that our organization is a leader in the ESG space, for instance, and they are doing the things that need to be done to impact, sort of the community. So one of the big things for me is that, making sure that your values are very clear and making sure that you stand by those values. And it's reflected in all your processes, even in hiring, in onboarding, in recruiting. And even when you need to let an employee go, making sure that those values are reflected along the continuum is extremely important for us. As young people, we like to see that. So that is one. The second thing for me is also flexibility. I think you mentioned mental health. When we were coming into the workforce, they told us, as you said, show up in the morning. First, in the morning, last to leave, putting your hours, that grind culture, mentality. That is still largely been built into us, so we still do that, but you will see that following the pandemic, when people began to sit down and really think about what matters in life, a lot of millennials resigned from their jobs because we realized that the whole grind mentality and culture was not serving us well and was not building, was not fostering our mental health. So mental health is also important, and I feel like organizations should take that seriously. And that comes up in so many different ways. One of them is flexibility in terms of work. So the balance between working from home and working in the office. I think we're having a conversation at the table before we came out, where the Gen Zers were talking about they prefer to be more in the office than out of the office because most of them finished college during the pandemic. And so they yearn for that environment. Whereas for us, we were in the office, we saw how it was like, and then we went home during the pandemic. And pandemic was awful, the isolation was awful. But we also realized that there was some silver lining in there. The flexibility of being able to work from anywhere. And even though we are a broke generation, we love to travel and see places. And sometimes, one of the things with the pandemic was you were able to work from anywhere, remote work. You are still productive. In fact, the research has shown that in a lot of cases, productivity even increased a bit more during the pandemic because people had the flexibility. You cut out commute time. You cut out some of the time that you would, sometimes you're in the office and open cubicles. I was talking about this. Open cubicles, for instance, you're in the office, your colleague is always, chit-chatting or something, there's noise, you can't concentrate and all of those. But in your own home environment, you are able to dedicate space where this is the time that I'm focused on doing work. So productivity tends to be better. And so I feel like employers should be more flexible when it comes to employees asking for time. So at our organization now, we are in the office Tuesdays through Thursday, 3 days a week. Monday, Friday, you could work from home. But even in those 3 days, if you feel like you want to be at home and work from home, there's that flexibility for that to happen. I think a lot more of that needs to happen. I know that it's hard to wrap mind around them because, sometimes someone's like, I'm working, but they're really making an omelette, but it's all part of the work process. And so I think that flexibility is extremely important to us. So those are
what I mentioned earlier too is that purpose is one of the things that really drives both of these generations. What I meant to say earlier is that please pay as well. It's just that when it comes to it, I think what differs us from these two generations and the previous generations is we're not just chasing a paycheck. We truly are chasing a life and a life of purpose. And so, you know, again, so we want to see what is this community doing what is this workplace doing in the community? How is my work translating into making other people's lives better? And I used to work for a bank, I won't say who, but they had this very crafty way of telling me that, you know, the work that you're doing, it's impacting every single person that you come across. And for a while I believed it. I truly did believe it. Until I had day after day of people coming through my life, telling me the same thing. Look, man, is there anything that you can do for me? My account is overdrafted $150, $30, $20. You guys are about to hit me with another fee. I can't pay that. I would have to say, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do for you. And sometimes, like, I would feel for these people because they would be in these difficult situations. And of course, there's people who just aren't good with money. Besides the point, I would plead with management all the time. Hey, is there anything that we can do to help these people? And it was always about the bottom line. And businesses, yes, we have to prioritize the bottom line because that's what we are in business to do. Ultimately, it's for a purpose. So we want to feel like we're not just taking money from people and we're adding on to people's misery. We truly do want to add value to the world.
I think paying is baseline a new norm, right? I think that we are coming to the point that we pay interns and that we're looking at raising minimum wage. And if you haven't looked at the social determinants of work, I really encourage you to do so. The United Way is actually running that in Cleveland right now. That pay is a huge problem affecting many of our neighbors and our peers. But one of the things I just wanted to highlight here is that people are turning down money when they get more flexibility. People are turning down money when they have the benefits package they're looking for. You know, anecdotally, I have a friend who turned down a $30K raise because they would have to go into the office 5 days a week. And that's just not where they're at anymore. And I think that the red thread of all of the points that we just shared for tips for you all is actually, to steal the words of our keynote this morning, personalization is vital. It is not a shocker that we are so accustomed to being individualized approached here, right? We are used to it from our marketing, from our social media, and so I think that employees now, we want a personalized and individualized approach from our employer. So a benefits package that's really flexible and fits the unique needs of the individual. For example, you know, I'm sure you've seen those stats that 30% of the workforce would prefer to have some form of remote work. If you disaggregate that by generations, 60% of millennials would prefer to have remote work options versus like 35% of Gen Z, right? So we're looking at a very different world when you look at the different employees. So just really encourage you to think about how can I serve the employee as an individual. And my tip that I just really want to share here is not just the employee, but the family. I think particularly when you look at millennials, we're having children a lot later. We're in our 30s and we don't have children. And so we're looking for our employers to look at us as a family planning opportunity. How are you making sure that there's good paternity and maternity leave, alternative family planning? You know, the big companies that have a ton of money have already figured this out, like Bain and McKinsey, they cover egg freezing completely. But what can you do to really meet people where they are and to have that individualized approach, I think is a really big question mark and a lot of work. So please know that we recognize these are really big asks. But we want to just quickly touch on before we hear from our friend Mick and turn to you all, the shadow of some of these tips. I don't like to think it as strengths and weaknesses, but every strength has a shadow, so things that get overlooked or get thrown under the bus, if you will. And I think all of us have seen examples where companies have made changes to serve next-gen talent, but it's actually backfired a little bit. So Juan and Julia, I'll have you guys start, because you sort of touched on it, of what you're seeing when companies are trying to show up and in terms of equity and access, but maybe it's not doing the job they want it to. I agree.
Where do I start? Okay, but I think I can reflect on my senior year of university. What was really challenging was, and I don't know if it was because of the fact that I graduated from Cleveland State, but I'm a very ambitious person. and I would apply to these ambitious places. You know, top financial companies, etc. And I would often get the feeling that I wouldn't even get my resume looked at because of where I attended, where my university was from. I was competing obviously with people from, you know, Ivy Leagues, etc. But I often got the sense that no one wanted to look at my resume, either because I was Latino or I was from Cleveland State University. And so, but people don't know the good things that are going on at Cleveland State University. And so I say all that to say that companies aren't giving people enough opportunities. I think it's not enough to say, hey, we want workers, we're all the workers, they're in the community. How do we give these people opportunities so that they can either get experience or prove themselves? Because as going back to the internship points, everyone that starts in an internship usually either grows into the company or they stay with the company. They grow and stay with the company, or they get the experience so that they can continue finding a better position, like a lot of us did. I worked at the House of Representatives in Congress for a time, and I'm grateful for the experience because that told me that for the moment, public government is not for me, but I want to pursue that later in the future. And so they gave me the opportunity, and I was so grateful for that. But it's, you know, again, just give people the opportunity, because if people don't have the opportunity for themselves to get the experience, then that also affects the ability to have a developed workforce.
Going off on a little bit of a separate note, one thing that I have trouble with is I prefer to be in office. That's just my personal preference, with a level of flexibility. So if you had a doctor's appointment, or if there was a situation where you couldn't be there right 9 a.m. on the dot, I appreciate that level of flexibility. But I do want to be in office. I think a lot about the culture and seeing your employees, fellow employees on a day-to-day basis. I think that is an important part, and maybe it is because we finished college having to take a lot of virtual classes. But one thing I do have a problem with, especially if you're in the 9 to 5, like rigid schedule, is if you're not filling up that time. If you're, my least favorite thing to do is having to sit at my desk and pretend that I'm busy. I want to be useful while I'm at work. I want to be filling my time up and constantly bettering the company, bettering myself. So that's one thing that I really have trouble with, if I'm sitting there and not having anything to do. So on the other hand, if I'm not doing anything, you don't have anything for me, then let me use that time as personal time. Let me get things done in my personal life so that it's not weighing on my mind. So I think that comes into the level of flexibility. So that's just a personal note. I don't want to have to seem like I'm busy. You can maybe give background tasks for just suggestions, whether that's professional development classes on LinkedIn or something that you could work on while, if you want them to be there 9 to 5. Because I feel like that might be a problem that a lot of people are dealing with if they do have to be in the office for the full day.
I mean, I think you touch on what's in the headlines right now as well, is the 40-hour work week gone? I think the world has changed a lot, and I'm sure you've seen they've been piloting 4-day work weeks. And what does that actually look like? How are we best utilizing people's time? And again, to lean into the 80 million unfilled jobs, what's causing that crisis? The lack of births. And if we don't allow people to have a balanced home life, then we're not going to really ever address that problem as a country. So I do think you bring up a great point of how are we best utilizing people's time, because it actually helps our economy if people have a personal life as well. But Kwame, is there anything you want to add here before we
Yeah, just two quick things. I know we often talk about work-life balance. Where I come from, we talk of work and happiness as a thing in Ghana. So you enter average Ghanaian office, everybody's very smiley and happy and all of that, because that's part of the ideology. So instead of work-life balance, I like to talk about life-work balance, because life comes first before work. So that is one. But you make an important point where I think that there's a need for continuous learning and improvement. Because there's a lot of things that we thought are the best ways of doing things, but times have shifted. And I think a lot of organizations are still stuck in those old ways and ideologies about what work is, where work should be, how work should be done, and all of those. And if only companies would take the time to do some introspection, reflection, and listen to their employees and see what is happening all around them, then there would be the opportunity to do some of that individualization or tailoring the work environment
we all feel this way, and I hope you feel the energy from us, that this is not an us versus you situation. It's more of, we recognize the world wasn't turned on its head, it was dropped on its head. In the last few years, we went from companies being forced to change culture in 2010, 2015, to being asked to do it all over again. So we really empathize and feel for what's happening, and that's why we want to share our perspectives today. But we want to turn now to actually give you a case study of what this looks like in real life. And I'd be remiss to say that I'm really sad. I didn't realize until just last night that we are not the typical workforce in Northeast Ohio. All of us have traditional education paths, to have undergrad, to have grad degrees, and we know most of your workers, or some of them, don't fit into our category. So that was a quick oversight by myself, and I'm sorry about that, but I think what's great is we have a case study here of how you can make these next-gen changes to really serve your workforce. So Mink is a colleague and become a good friend of mine, and he owns a factory, and I'll let him tell his whole story, but he's going to show you how there's actual good ROI to making these changes and keeping next-gen talent, even if they are on the floor in a factory. So Mink, come join us, please.
Thank you. All right, so my story is that, I'm firmly planted Gen X, happily mid-40s. And my path to, this, as I call it, the most fortunate, unfortunate title that can be bestowed upon somebody is that I'm a very accidental CEO president. I've been in the injection molding manufacturing industry since I was 16 years old. So for 29 years now, I've been in every aspect of it. For me, I was national sales for almost the last decade. My father, Ted, owned Pilot Plastics. Now, before everybody says like, oh, that's so sad, I didn't have a relationship with him. I worked with him. It was an epic failure. I left. I had not worked for him. It was 14 years, and then he passed away a year ago. So my mother was left this company, and she said, what are we going to do with it? I said, you can do whatever you want with it. So I have fun. I was firmly planted, and we know where all of these folks are. I worked from home for the last 7 years. I didn't really work too much on Mondays and Fridays, traveled all over between Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, and St. Louis. And I looked at the challenge. The biggest challenge was that Pilot Plastics had a very draconian view on how to treat people. So I got legal authority to kind of assess Pilot Plastics because it was still running. And when we walked in, they should have had 125 employees. They had 36, with a 70% reliance on temporary labor. That's an issue. And the issue is that nobody wanted to work there. They could not attract anybody to work there whatsoever, whether it was a skilled or unskilled position. So when I finally said yes to this endeavor to, as I put it, to refloat the Titanic, we said, okay, we got our core Pilot Plastics compass of responsibility. And number one was employees. They said, we can't do any of this. We have customers, we have vendors, there's so much depending on what we do. But we can't do it without the true backbone of the company, which are the employees. Because we're not a very, unfortunately, in Ted's world, manufacturing peaked in 1992. So we didn't have a whole lot of technology, we don't have a lot of automation and things like that, so we have to rely on people. What we did was that we looked at, okay, what are wages across the board? What are wages in the area? What do people want? What do the employees want? So we did this, and had to happen fast. I mean, this wasn't like a 6-month case study. We had weeks. And what we did was we adjusted all wages. And we went from, it was almost a $5 jump an hour for entry level. We watched that, and all of a sudden, our sales numbers started to grow because we had people that wanted to be there because all of a sudden they were able to make a decent living. And this is entry-level unskilled labor. So then what we did was we said, okay, if you have the aptitude and the want, we're going to have career paths. We're going to have paths of advancement that earn you more money and responsibility. Because what people wanted was, the money was important, but what they really wanted was to feel that they were part of something bigger. They wanted the responsibility. So the micromanagement was done away with. And a lot of people I hear, they're like, I swear I'm not a micromanager. That's telling me that you are a micromanager. Every boss that I've had over the years, they're like, I don't micromanage. I'm like, you're micromanaging right now, man. Like, back up. And so we cut that out, and we just kind of gave people the room to flourish and to grow on their own. And so fast forward to today, and I'll do a little jump back, but we're at 95 hired in employees. And now our temporary service reliance is cut down to about 25%. We're doing exceptionally well. We track all the issues on why we've had downtime or why we're having problems on the floor. People not showing up and people not being there is not one of our main reasons. Maintenance, robotics issues, resin delivery, color concentrate, things like that. Those are our main issues. But people being there or not. So what we did is we said, okay, if you want to go into quality control, if you want to learn how to work the floor, if you want to go into the warehouse, we set out paths of advancement. And we're also working with a number of groups in Northeast Ohio to start an apprenticeship/internship program to get people that don't want to do the traditional 4-year college program, because that just doesn't apply for what we do, that they can go into maintenance, they can go into tooling, they can go into a higher level QC operation. We send all of our people up to robotics training in Connecticut. We also, because of the nature of our machinery, we set up training courses with the builders of that equipment because we want to have the most stable workforce possible, and we can't do it without investing in the people. But we also are very mindful of what our folks need on the floor. So we have the standard HR department, which is the nuts and bolts, the brass tacks, the protocols and procedures. Don't do that, you can do this, this is okay. That's great. But we also have, we call it the Department of Workforce Management, or as they call it, it's kind of our emotions and feelings department. We have somebody that walks around and is like, hey, are you okay today? You look a little, you okay? You know, is everything, you feeling good? How the family, how the kids, how was the soccer game? That department does more for the entire shop floor than I can do or anybody else can do. Everybody loves the fact that they feel that they're part of this family, and they feel that there's a dynamic to, it's one-on-one, it's a little more personal. And that's why we've been able to keep people in-house. They understand the HR side of it, but they want that one-on-one. And we give that to them, but not in a mechanized, robotic, mechanical way, but we do it in a very human way, and it works for us. It wasn't easy because I had 20 years of the most draconian culture to change at Pilot Plastics. I've only been there, I haven't even hit my 1-year mark. October 6th of last year is when I walked through those doors. What we've done in a year is, I think it might have been easier to move the Rock of Gibraltar at this point, but we did it in the numbers that we show. So, our sales numbers, because we had people there and we had people showing up, our sales increased by 15%. It paid for all the things that we had done, and it didn't affect our bottom line, because that's what most everybody's worried about as a business owner. What's my bottom line? What's my bottom line? Can't give raises, can't do this. But a lot of folks, they don't think about the efficiencies that it brings and what the Department of Feelings and Emotions can bring. And we joke about it, and everybody loves it. They always go like, I gotta go talk to Jason. He's the Department of Feelings and Emotions. I didn't coin it. We didn't coin it. Out on the floor coined it, and that was pretty cool. So that's kind of our story. So, you know, we're working with a lot of different groups of people, working on apprenticeship programs, and, you know, we also changed our shift structure. We run 24/7. We did away with the traditional 8-hour shift. We run a 12-hour shift. So everybody knows their entire schedule for the whole year. They work 15 days a month, they're off 15 days a month. Everybody loves it. They can go to the doctors, they can go to kids' events. And we also allow them to swap if they want to swap between the day shifts or the night shifts, because they have an event on this night that they're scheduled to work that night, but they'll take another shift. So our flexibility with your life and what you have going on, we took that into account, and that's why we've been successful, and it works well.
And I think what's incredible is not only did it pay for itself, but also saved you money. I recently was reading the opportunity cost is like $950 a day for every unfilled position on the factory floor. So you're not only losing money by not doing this work, but you're also missing out on money gained, which is really, really important. I know that we are kind of coming up on time, but we want this to be a conversation. And like I said, I think we're only going to solve this if it's multi-generational. And so we'd love to turn to you all for any questions of any of us up here. You can direct it to an individual or just us as a group. Bob, who I'm going to call him out, he's personally responsible for me moving to Ohio with no connection. So,
welcome to Ohio. And can you hear me? Anyway, what are your thoughts how to navigate promotion opportunities if you're at least on a hybrid situation, maybe primarily remote? Because typically, people in a higher position, evaluate talent, rely a lot on spontaneity and just incidental conversations to assess people's progression in terms of taking responsibility. So I'd like to hear your comments on that.
That's a great question. I'll just repeat the beginning of it, is our thoughts on promotions, because a lot of that used to happen around the water cooler and the office just doesn't look the same, and I'll open it to anybody actually, but one point I just want to make is I am very wary of tracking our employees and tracking how much that their computer is on or active. I don't think that that's going to fly well with millennials. I don't know about your generation, but my guess is we don't want to be surveillanced like that, and so I would just caution that being a way, but does anyone have thoughts on how do you think that employers or managers can be engaging for promotion?
I think first thing that comes to mind, just from a business perspective, is you just want to look at the employees' results. They're not in the office all the time. Well, then you can't really see how they are or around other people, but you can always look at their results. Do they always deliver on time? Do they always deliver quality results? Is this someone that I've delegated responsibilities to that I can continue delegating more responsibilities to after? And I think it's just looking at a proven track record of like, okay, they've been successful and they've done it very well for these past 8 months, years, etc. So would they be open? Because then it also comes down to this. One thing that I'm observing is that a lot of employees that work, some employees that work remotely, any employee really, some of them may not be interested in also just being promoted. Some of them may just be kind of like what she said earlier, offer $30,000, more than on top of their current salary, but they didn't want to take it because that affected their work-life balance. So to answer your question though, results, proven results. And I don't know if anyone else has anything else to offer.
I think if you could feel comfortable handing a project off to someone, you're like, I'm going to hand this off to Tanya and I know she's going to get it done. I think that speaks volumes. So how you feel about the employee, and I think this touches base on knowing your employees, knowing what they're capable of. But if you were like, oh, I have a project and I'm not sure Tanya's going to get it done, I mean, that's not someone you want to give a promotion. So I think part of it is, if you want this employee to stick around, if you think they're a valuable asset to your company, you need to make sure that you're making their time worthwhile.
One thing I just want to add on to that is a recent conversation with all my friends right now is, when did we become so obsessed with climbing the ladder? Again, I'll just speak on behalf of myself and my peers, particularly as women in business, being like, wow, we just woke up and all of a sudden 10 years of work has gone by and we've been climbing and climbing and climbing when actually we probably would have rather have been a mother already and have a stable job that we're not burnt out from. So I think to think about ways that you can do promotion that doesn't burn people out. And maybe someone is really happy in their role, and how are you helping them develop and feel satisfied in the same role? I think it's a new conversation, at least the first time I've heard it coming up more frequently. Call me or make anything to add, and then we'll get another question.
I think an incredibly important thing is transparency around what the protocols for promotions are. And I think that applies to whether it's in person or virtual, so the employees know that if I want a promotion, I know this is how it works, this is how it's going to go. And I think that takes away the water cooler conversations that would lead to promotions, because what ends up happening in situations like that is you see a lot of the inequities that you would see in the workplace, where a lot of women are getting passed over for promotions because they are not necessarily the ones at the water cooler talking about the Browns game. And so you're not getting to see that. Or for someone like me who is not from here, from Ghana, I don't know much about football anyway, so I'm not going to be at the bar with you to talk about Browns. And so if those are the protocols for getting to assess who might be ready and who might not be, that leaves people that are actually talented behind in that sequence. And so I think, I agree with everything else that has been said, is that knowing that these are the indicators, these are the things that we want to see in someone that we feel is ready to take on another position, having clarity around that and having the employees know that this is what it will take, and making sure that evaluations of staff and performance evaluations and all of those things are happening on an ongoing basis, and not just like at the end of the year, so employees know these things are happening, would be incredibly important in sort of making some of these decisions.
And if I can ask, if we borrow 5 extra minutes of your time, I want to get to the other question at the back of the room before we wrap up.
Oh, sure. I appreciate it. It's been a really valuable panel. I appreciate the perspective for everyone. I'll ask the question first and I'll give the context. Are we headed for a leadership bubble? It's something I've found myself thinking about a lot in the last 12 months. Now keep in mind, I've built 2 companies where life came first, for me personally and for my team. I've always been a big proponent of flexibility, remote work when possible. But I also came up in a generation where you learned how to lead by example and observation, and you were around leaders, and you saw how they interacted with people, and their mannerisms and their behavior. And we lost all that in the pandemic. You can't see that through Zoom. And so then mixed with, we have a lot of people who don't want to climb the ladder anymore, as you're saying. And I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, I'm basically just asking an open-ended question I've been asking myself, is as a society, are we headed in the next 10 years towards a leadership bubble where there is no next generation of leaders who have actually been trained to lead a team, to create that perception of leadership by their own example, because they don't see how hard you're working when you're off Zoom. Whereas in the office, you see it, even if it's just 9 to 5 or 10 to 6, whatever it is. And so again, it's more of an open-ended question. Is it something you all have thought about? I mean, you're thinking about your own careers and leadership, and how do you become a leader when we're not present with each other, I think is my question for this next generation of hopeful business leaders.
I won't say, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I think the pandemic, everything that was wrong with the world already existed prior to the pandemic, and the fact that the pandemic happened just made matters worse. Just truly amplified all of the problems that we have in society. I believe that we have had a lack of leadership even before the pandemic. And I don't know how you guys feel about that, because I feel that I started observing that around 2018, 2019, I just felt that we really didn't have enough leaders in the world as it is. And the few that we do have are either moving on to retirement or passing away, unfortunately.
I think the definition of leadership itself is evolving with time. So for us millennials and even for Gen Zers, what they would describe or define as leadership is very different from what generation prior would. And so for a lot of us now, it's a lot of talk about servant leadership. So we want to do things, we want to take the leadership, we want to lead efforts and initiatives that make sense.
and that align with our, values and all of those. And we know that people that are still in leadership now, sometimes there's this disconnect. And so the question becomes, if you really want to solve for that leadership bubble that you feel is coming, how do you create opportunities where those of us that are coming are able to step into those roles and not feel like you have to fill a certain standard, like what you did with your company, for instance, stepping in and making some of these changes that if your dad was still here would have been very unpopular with him. And so leaving the space for the new leaders that are coming on board to define what they want their leadership to be, and not putting too much containers around that is going to ensure that a lot more of us that are interested in leadership positions are comfortable stepping into those roles without feeling like we need to compromise certain personal values just because we want to be in a certain position.
Sure. I know from being Generation Z, I feel very excited to take on a leadership position. I know it's something that I'm striving towards in the future. So I know you were wondering, maybe will we have a lack of leaders? And I've had some experience with leaders that weren't so great, or people that I do want to take after. And I think maybe young leaders is something that we're going to have in the future. I've seen it in my company already that the younger generation taking on positions of managers or supervisors, and I think although some people are retiring, just because we may not have these years of experience doesn't mean we don't have the talent to take on that leadership role. And that's something that I really look forward to in the coming years, to taking on that leadership role. And I think there's a lot of ways you can learn leadership than just in person. I think there's all walks of life you can learn from people. They did this really well and apply it to a work setting. So although we may not be seeing those on a day-to-day basis, especially if we're working in a hybrid or virtual environment, I don't feel like we're going to have too much of a problem. I think no matter what, there's going to be people who prevail and step into a leadership position.
Absolutely. And I just want to point something out that you said. There will always be leaders. It just reminded me of how in a lot of the employment opportunities that I've had in the past, they didn't really offer a clear path to leadership, or they didn't really explain how to become a leader within the organization. I think that the expectation was always just show up, do what you're supposed to do, and if you do good enough, we'll consider you for a leadership position. And I don't know what you guys might think about that as well, because I've seen that, and I think that's part of the problem. We haven't had leaders in such a long time, or good leaders, leader pipeline, because we haven't had a pipeline, a path forward. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, I left the traditional workforce to start my own company because I was tired of waiting for sort of this unknown timeline. And interesting with your question, I actually interpreted it the opposite way when you started speaking, because I thought we were going to have too many leaders. I think that, at least for my peers, we are ready to be at the table. And I just want to be clear, we're not ready to be at the table to tell you what to do, but to just be a part of the conversation. I think just personally, a challenge we're going to face in leadership in the coming years is that boomers have been there a really long time. Gen X has fought for a seat at the table and had to deal with a really hard culture to get there. And then you've got all of us who are just ready to go. And so I think there's some tension perhaps between us and Gen X that needs to be worked on and nurtured. And I think that's what these multi-generational conversations can do and can become. And as we wrap up today, I wish we had more time and hopefully we can have smaller conversations. I just want to share my favorite quote because I think it really captures why we're here and the power of this conversation. So Lila Watson once said, "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is tied up with mine, then let us work together." We're not here to help you because that's not helpful. We're here because we want a workforce that is fulfilling, that's impact-driven, that's going to help us have a really lovely life. And you all want a workforce that is productive and fulfilled. And so I think right now our liberation is tied up with each other. And we hope that this is just step one of many, many conversations, multi-general conversations. And as I always say, save a seat, invite the younger staff on your tables to events like this. Looking out in the room, there's not a whole lot of us out there, so next time I encourage you to bring a next-gen talent member anytime you have a seat at the table, because I think we can figure this out. The number is daunting, but I really do think we're going to find a solution. So thank you all for giving us a seat. Thank you guys for sharing your stories, for being great.